I slid the hospital diagnostic report across the tea shop wooden table for Qindong to scan, my fingers steady despite years of buried humiliation tied to this document. The official hospital stamp sat beside the clinical verdict: stage 4 endometriosis, spontaneous conception probability, less than 1%. I'd carried this paper everywhere since my first marriage collapsed, the proof of why my ex-husband's entire family had cast me out as a useless woman unfit for marriage. Qindong barely glanced at the medical paperwork before folding the prenuptial contract his corporate attorney drafted and sliding it toward me. The typed supplementary clause jumped out first, bolded black and plain to read. The female party bears no obligation to conceive or bear children for the Chen household. Let's get this straight up front, he said, voice flat, no softness or romantic undertones in his tone, exactly the detached energy I'd been craving after years of family pressure over my fertility status. This is a business partnership on paper for legal and social convenience. You handle household administration and accompany me to company banquets when required. I deposit 200,000 yuan monthly into your personal account, unlimited access to the family sedan, cover all medical and care costs for your relatives if needed. Neither of us will demand emotional attachment or force life-altering commitments from the other. He paused, reading my quiet, relieved expression and adding a sharp, clear caveat. No fights over heirs, no nagging about pregnancy. That's non-negotiable for me, same as it's non-negotiable for you, from what your mutual friend relayed. I signed the contract without hesitation that afternoon. No wedding ceremony, no banquet, only a civil marriage certificate processed at the district registry office the next morning. My core hope for this arrangement was simple. For once in my adult life, I could exist without constant reminders of my diagnosed infertility. That hope shattered within 30 minutes of stepping foot inside Qindong's 3-story suburban villa and meeting his mother Zhang Lan. Zhang Lan blocked the front doorway before I could cross the threshold, eyes raking my figure top to bottom like an inspector grading defective merchandise, her first unfiltered comment cutting straight through the thin truce Qindong promised we'd have. Skinny frame, hips narrow, doesn't look like she's capable of bearing sons anyway. Qindong stepped between us to defuse the moment, but his half-hearted mediation did nothing to erase the venom in Zhang Lan's glare. The first red flag hit me hard that day. The no child pressure agreement Qindong and I signed only applied to him. His mother had zero intention of honoring the written legal terms. Dinner that night laid bare the full extent of Zhang Lan's unspoken resentment toward me. She ladled a full bowl of thick black chicken tonic soup and slid it directly in front of my seat, tone saccharine yet laced with hidden demands. Drink every drop, nourish your weak body. I've consulted 3 veteran herbal practitioners. Consistent tonic therapy can reverse barrenness, no matter what hospital papers claim. I pushed the bowl away gently, pulling out a printed copy of our signed contract from my handbag and tapping the child exemption clause for her to see. The legal agreement Qindong and I both signed explicitly states I will not be required to undergo fertility treatment or carry children. Zhang slammed her chopsticks against the mahogany dining table hard enough to make ceramic bowls rattle, sneering at the printed paperwork like it was worthless scrap paper. A piece of paper means nothing inside this village. You've married into the Chen household, so you follow our family rules, not some lawyer's meaningless text. If you cannot produce an heir to inherit Dong's logistics empire, you will never hold a stable place under this roof. Chen only sighed and told us to drop the argument, refusing to take my side or set a firm boundary with his mother. That night, I lingered downstairs for a glass of water after showering and overheard Zhang talking on her phone through her slightly ajar bedroom door, every word crystal clear. She'd hired a private investigator to dig up every detail of my prior divorce, gossiping about how my former in-laws tossed me out solely for failing to conceive a child, labeling me damaged goods who'd manipulated her son for cash. My phone buzzed minutes later with an anonymous text message, short and vicious. Stay far away from my dad. You're only here for his money. I instantly recognized the sharp, bitter tone as Qinyu's, Qindong's college daughter, who'd ignored my existence entirely upon arriving home from school that weekend. When Qinyu showed up for her weekend stay 2 days later, the household hostility amplified tenfold. She refused to acknowledge my presence at the dinner table until Qindong prompted her to greet me, then dragged out a dramatic, accusatory rant targeting the monthly 200,000 yuan spousal allowance written into our contract. Dad's throwing hundreds of thousands at a stranger who can't even give him grandkids? This money should be saved for my future wedding, not wasted on a woman who'll never contribute anything to our family bloodline. Zhang sat silently sipping soup through the whole tirade, offering zero pushback against her granddaughter's cruel accusations, confirmation the grandmother had stoked Jinyu's hatred of me long before I moved into the villa. When I retreated to my master bedroom after dinner, I realized the entire villa functioned as a gilded cage. Qindong stayed buried in his office, most days traveling for logistics business, leaving me alone with 2 women who viewed me as a parasitic, defective outsider they were forced to tolerate for their patriarchal inheritance goals. To escape the suffocating household tension, I signed up for pottery and floral design workshops outside the villa, spending as much time away as possible. I strictly adhered to every clause of our partnership contract, managed all household accounts, attended corporate galas beside Qindong without complaint, never pried into his private business or a personal social circle. I never initiated fights with Zhang or Qinyu, choosing quiet avoidance to preserve the fragile peace Qindong claimed he wanted. 6 months into the contractual marriage, I finished a 3-hour floral workshop and drove back to the villa, hit with sudden, crippling nausea halfway through the commute. The scent of gasoline from the car tank-triggered violent dry heaves, a persistent early morning queasiness settling over me for the following week. Every whiff of cooking oil or meat sent me rushing to the bathroom to retch. A ridiculous, impossible thought crept into my mind every time I hunched over the sink. Could I be pregnant? I discarded the idea instantly, recalling the doctor's cold clinical verdict of under 1% natural conception odds, a diagnosis reinforced by years of failed hormone treatment in my first marriage. Still, paranoia pushed me to stop at a neighborhood pharmacy on my way home, purchasing 3 separate brands of at-home pregnancy tests to eliminate any margin of error. I locked my bedroom door shut tight once back at the villa, hands shaking as I unwrapped each test stick and waited the designated reaction time for each sample. All 3 tests displayed 2 distinct, bold red control lines. I sank to the cold tiled bedroom floor staring at the sticks, my mind racing to process the impossible reality. The only night Chin-dong and I had shared a bed was our civil marriage signing evening. He'd gotten heavily intoxicated at the registry dinner, and we'd had one single fleeting intimate encounter 6 months prior, nothing after that. The astronomical medical improbability had landed directly on my shoulders, and I instantly understood what this unplanned pregnancy would unleash inside this hostile household. Zhang and Chinyu had spent 6 months labeling me a permanently barren gold digger. The second they discovered I was carrying Chen's child, their hatred would twist into violent, unhinged suspicion that I plotted a deliberate scheme to trap him with a baby and seize his corporate assets. I stuffed all 3 test sticks deep inside a locked storage box beneath my closet floor, resolved to book an off-site obstetrician appointment alone to confirm the results before breaking the news to Chin-dong. But Zheng's constant surveillance derailed my plan immediately. When I attempted to drive out the villa gates the next morning claiming a meeting with old co-workers, she planted herself directly in front of my vehicle's hood, refusing to step aside and demanding full details of every place I planned to visit. When I refused to let her tag along with a family driver as a chaperone, she flew into a screaming accusation, accusing me of sneaking out to meet a secret male lover. I rushed out a side mall exit after forcing the driver to stop mid-journey, hailing an independent taxi to rush to the municipal maternity hospital, terrified Zhang would follow and intercept my prenatal exam appointment before I could verify the pregnancy diagnosis. The obstetric ultrasound exam delivered irrefutable proof of an active gestational sac with clear, steady fetal heart tones beating on the monitor screen. The attending doctor handed over a printed B-scan report with a soft congratulatory note, and I left the clinic overwhelmed with conflicting emotions, quiet, long-suppressed joy at carrying a child I'd spent years believing I could never have, tangled with crippling terror over how Zhang and Xinyu would retaliate once they uncovered the secret. When I returned to the villa at dusk, I walked into a full inquisition waiting for me in the living room. Zhang, Chin-dong, and Xinyu sat lined up on the leather sectional sofa, all 3 faces sharp with suspicion after Zhang had spent hours badgering the villa driver for every detail of my detour that day. Zhang immediately launched into vicious accusations that I'd snuck off to meet an extramarital partner, Xinyu jumping in to echo her grandmother's venomous claims that I was hiding an affair from her father. Chin-dong's expression shifted from weary neutrality to quiet distrust as he listened to their unsubstantiated slander against me, his first question upon addressing me that night not asking if I was safe, but demanding where I'd spent the entire day alone without a witness to corroborate my story. I retreated upstairs to my locked bedroom after the confrontation, hiding the official B-scan report inside a password-protected journal stored beneath my closet floor alongside the 3 positive pregnancy tests. That night, I realized a third major reversal was looming ahead. If Chinyu or Zhang found the hidden tests and ultrasound paperwork before I could calmly explain the single night of intimacy with Chin-dong 6 months prior, they would manufacture accusations of infidelity and demand a forced abortion, dragging me to a court-ordered paternity test to publicly humiliate me in front of all their relatives. I'd entered this contract marriage seeking freedom from infertility judgment, only to be trapped in a far deadlier conflict spawned by the one miracle medical science deemed nearly impossible. The quiet peace I'd bargained for with a 200,000 monthly allowance had vanished entirely, and I faced an inevitable, brutal showdown the moment my secret pregnancy was exposed to the Chin family's hostile matriarch and entitled daughter. I locked my bedroom door tight every night after returning from the maternity clinic, stashing the B-ultrasound report and 3 positive test sticks deep inside a metal-locked notebook tucked at the bottom of my wardrobe storage box. I'd made up my mind to wait until Chin-dong finished his week-long business trip, then sit down with him alone to lay out every detail. Our single night of intimacy after the civil registration dinner, the less than 1% medical odds, the official hospital scan proving a viable fetus existed inside me. I needed no audience, no screaming accusations, just a private, rational conversation between the 2 people bound by our signed partnership contract. But I underestimated Chinyu's obsessive desire to dig through my private belongings when I left the house each day for art classes. I'd made the careless mistake of leaving the bedroom window cracked open slightly for ventilation that Wednesday afternoon, unaware she'd slipped back from college early that day with no advance notice, waiting for a chance to rifle through my drawers while the housekeeper was busy tidying the garden out back. I came home around 6 p.m. Exhausted after a 4-hour floral design session, and noticed tiny signs of rummaging the second I stepped into the room. My wardrobe storage lid sat askew, the zipper on my fabric storage bag unzipped, and the locked notebook I'd hidden had been pried open with a small metal nail file she'd swiped from the study desk. My heart dropped straight into my stomach the second I spotted the empty slot where I'd hidden the pregnancy evidence. All 3 test sticks and the printed hospital scan were gone, stolen without a trace. Before I could even process the panic flooding my chest, heavy footsteps thundered up the staircase, and the study door flew open hard enough to slam against the wall. Chonyu burst into the room first, clutching the white plastic test sticks raised high above her head like damning criminal evidence, her face twisted with triumphant rage. Zhang Lan trailed right behind her, hands clenched into fists, Chin-dong following at the rear. He'd cut his business trip short overnight after Zhang called to rant about what he'd found, summoned home for an impromptu family reckoning. The 3 of them lined up across my bedroom floor, forming a wall of unbridled hostility before I could even close the door behind me. Chenyu held up the 2 red lines printed clear on every test stick for Qindong to see, her voice shrill and triumphant, designed to poison his mind before I could utter a single word in my own defense. Dad, look what I found hidden in her closet. She's pregnant, and don't you dare believe a single word out of her mouth. This baby cannot possibly be yours. Zhang Lan cut in the second Chenyu finished her rant, stepping forward with venom dripping from every sentence, her eyes blazing with contempt as she jabbed a finger straight at my midsection. I knew you were a scheming, shameless woman from the day you walked through this gate. You spent 6 months pretending you couldn't bear children, letting us pity and tolerate you, all while sneaking around behind my son's back to carry another man's bastard. I stood frozen beside the bed, my hands instinctively flying up to cradle my stomach without thinking. The tiny, fragile life growing inside me was already my top priority, and every word of their slander felt like a physical blow aimed directly at the baby I'd spent years dreaming of carrying. Chundong's gaze drifted from the test sticks up to my face, his expression clouded with conflicted confusion instead of comfort or joy. I watched him hesitate, and that split second of unspoken doubt sliced deeper than any insult his mother or daughter hurled my way. Where did you even get the nerve to pull this stunt? Chunyu marched closer, waving the test sticks wildly inches from my face, her tone laced with mocking disgust. You signed a contract saying you didn't want kids. Dad paid you 200 grand every single month to live comfortably without any demands. Then you run off and sleep with some random man to trap him with an illegitimate child, just to steal his fortune. I never slept with anyone besides your father, I said flatly, my voice steady despite the tremor running through my limbs. I refused to raise my voice and sink to their level of screaming accusation, choosing calm clarity instead to counter their manufactured lies. There is only one night we were intimate, the evening we got our marriage certificate, when he'd had too much wine at the dinner afterward. The doctor confirmed the gestational timeline lines up perfectly with that single night. Zhang barked out a harsh, bitter laugh in response to my explanation, crossing her arms tight over her chest in open disbelief. Lies. All transparent lies. Dong was away for a full 2 weeks last month. This pregnancy lines up exactly with the days he was out of town, which means you had plenty of free time to sneak your lover over to this villa while we were all gone. That fabricated timeline caught me completely off guard, and I realized how thoroughly they'd coordinated their attack before I'd even walked through the front door. They'd mapped out a false narrative together to paint me as an adulteress before I had any chance to present my hospital proof. Mom, that's exactly what I told you earlier. Chunyu nodded vigorously, feeding her grandmother's manufactured story without a single shred of fact-checking. She's been sneaking out every single week claiming to meet old coworkers. We all knew she was hiding a secret boyfriend this entire time. Today we finally have hard proof of her betrayal right in our hands. Zhang took a sharp step forward, raising an open palm like she planned to strike me square across the cheek, her voice rising into a shrill scream loud enough to carry down the staircase to the housekeeper's ears. A barren woman who suddenly pops up pregnant out of nowhere. It's a scam through and through. Tomorrow morning we're dragging you straight to a hospital to terminate this wild seed before it brings shame to the Chen family name forever. The words, terminate this wild seed, triggered an instantaneous surge of protective panic inside me. I flinched backward, pressing my body against the bedroom wall, both arms wrapped tight around my lower abdomen to shield the baby they were threatening to take away from me. Chun Dong finally moved to step between his mother and me, catching Zhang's raised wrist before her hand could make contact with my face, but his intervention felt hollow and half-hearted. He didn't defend my innocence. He only stopped the physical violence, leaving the vicious verbal accusations hanging heavy in the air unchallenged. Mom, don't hit her. We can settle this properly without fighting, he said, his tone tired and unresolved, no clear siding visible in his words. He turned to face me next, his eyes heavy with unspoken suspicion. Wenjing, what they're saying about you sneaking out to meet other men, could there be any truth to it? That single question broke the thin thread of fragile hope I'd clung to for 6 months of quiet compromise in this household. All the small favors I'd done for him, every dinner I'd cooked, every corporate event I'd attended by his side, every time I'd swallowed Zhang and used cruel remarks without retaliation, none of it mattered to him the second his family planted a seed of doubt in his head. You truly believe I'd betray you after signing a contract explicitly stating I wanted no entanglement or outside relationships? I asked him quietly, my voice stripped of all warmth now. All I asked for when I married you was a quiet life free of fertility judgment, and you still let them paint me as a cheating gold digger without a single ounce of trust in me. Zhang wasted no time jumping back into the argument the second Chen finished his half-hearted question, doubling down on her threats and laying out an absurd ultimatum she claimed was non-negotiable. If the baby really is Dong's, we'll apologize and treat you like our family's treasure. But if that DNA test proves it belongs to some random stranger you hooked up with, 2 consequences you'll have to accept without pushback. She listed off harsh terms one by one, her tone cold and unyielding. First, you immediately undergo an abortion and leave this villa within 24 hours with 0 compensation from Dong's assets. Second, you kneel on the villa front gate for a full day and publicly apologize to every neighbor for disgracing our entire bloodline. Chunyu chimed in right beside her grandmother, amplifying the cruel ultimatum with even harsher demands, desperate to make sure I suffered maximum humiliation if the test went against me. And you'll hand back every cent Dad's transferred to you these past 6 months, every car key and jewelry he's given you. You don't deserve a single dime of our family's money after what you've done. I stood there processing their joint punishment plan for a long beat, a strange, calm resolve settling over my chest instead of crippling fear. All their threats, all their fabricated lies, all their coordinated attempts to strip me of my child and dignity, all of it could be dismantled with one official prenatal DNA test report backed by hospital medical records. I held all the factual leverage in the standoff, even if they couldn't see it yet. I lifted my head, meeting Zhang's unblinking, hostile stare dead on. No trace of hesitation in my voice as I accepted their forced gamble. Find it, I'll go for the prenatal DNA test tomorrow morning at the Certified Genetic Identification Center downtown. I'll sign all the consent forms for the amniocentesis procedure. No delays, no excuses from my side. Zhang and Qinyu both froze for half a second. Clearly stunned, I agreed to their ultimatum, without begging or pleading for mercy, like they'd anticipated. They'd spent hours rehearsing how to break me down into hysterical tears, expecting me to fight tooth and nail to avoid the test, yet I'd agreed instantly, without a single counterbargain. Chundong's eyebrows shot upward in surprise too, the doubt lingering in his eyes softening just a fraction as he watched my unshaken, unpanicked demeanor. If I truly had something to hide, I would have fought tooth and nail to delay the DNA procedure. My willingness to submit told him there was a strong chance my claims of innocence were rooted in hard medical fact. Zhang recovered from her shock fast, falling back on her harsh, triumphant tone to mask the flicker of uncertainty creeping into her mindset. Don't think agreeing to the test will save you. We've already scheduled the earliest possible appointment with a top genetic doctor first thing tomorrow. We're all riding in the same car, so you can't sneak off or alter any samples along the way. I nodded once in acknowledgement, turning away from the three of them to walk over to the window and stare out at the villa's garden below. I could feel the tiny faint flutter of life inside my belly, a quiet reminder of the miracle I carried, the proof that would unravel every single lie the Qin family had woven to destroy my reputation. Chundong lingered in the doorway a minute longer after his mother and daughter stormed back downstairs to plan tomorrow's hospital trip, his expression torn between guilt and lingering suspicion. I didn't mean to doubt you, he said quietly from behind me, voice heavy with remorse. It's just hard to wrap my head around the idea you're pregnant after that hospital report you showed me 6 months ago. I didn't turn to face him, only responded with a distant, cold line that drew a clear line between us after his failure to defend me. The hospital paperwork doesn't account for rare, natural miracles. Tomorrow the DNA lab will hand us irrefutable proof of who this child's father is. Until then, there's nothing left to say between us. He stood silent for several more seconds before trudging back down the stairs, leaving me alone in the quiet bedroom with my unborn baby and the weight of their vicious accusations hanging thick in the air. That night, I barely slept, one hand resting permanently over my stomach, mentally running through every medical record, ultrasound detail, and contract clause I could use to dismantle their fabricated infidelity narrative once the DNA results were released the next afternoon. Dawn broke far too early the next morning, Zhang banging my bedroom door at 6 a.m. sharp to rush me out of bed and into the family sedan waiting in the driveway. The four of us piled into the vehicle together. Qindong behind the wheel, Zhang and Qinyu crowding the back seats to box me in on the passenger side, acting like I might attempt to flee the car mid-transit to avoid the test. The drive to the Genetic Identification Center was suffocatingly quiet, broken only by Zhang's constant snide side comments and Qinyu's quiet muttering about how I'd soon be forced out of their family for good. Neither of them realized the two bombshell revelations waiting to drop once the doctor presented the official lab report. Not only a 9,999% positive paternal match confirming Qindong as the baby's father, but a second shocking piece of medical news the ultrasound technician had flagged on my scan. My body was carrying rare monoamniotic twin infants, 2 healthy babies growing safely inside my womb at once. This dual revelation would completely shatter Zhang and Qinyu's entire fabricated narrative in one blow, flip Qindong's lingering doubt into overwhelming, crippling guilt, and hand me total leverage to rewrite the power dynamic inside the villa permanently. As we pulled into the center's parking lot, I rested a protective hand over my belly, fully ready to watch every one of their cruel threats and slander collapse under cold, objective scientific proof. The air inside the genetic testing center's consultation room was sterile white and dead silent the second we all sat down. Zhanlan pulled a chair as far from me as she could, crossing her arms tight across her chest and shooting me repeated sharp side-eye glares. Chunyu sat glued to her grandmother's side, scrolling short videos to pretend she didn't care, but her thumb kept stuttering over the screen. She couldn't hide her nervous anticipation waiting for a negative DNA result to ruin my life. Chundong sat beside me on the left, his knee bouncing nonstop. He hadn't spoken a single word to me the entire drive over. Every time I glanced at him, his gaze darted away, unable to meet my eyes after letting his mother and daughter scream about me carrying an illegitimate child the night prior. Dr. Zhou carried a thick sealed file folder into the room 5 minutes later, setting it flat on the wooden desk without extra small talk. His expression was strictly professional, no hint of emotion to tip off the results ahead of time. "Thank you all for waiting for the expedited lab analysis," he said, sliding the folder toward Qindong, the legal signing party for the prenatal paternity test. "Before we go over the paternal matching data, there's a secondary ultrasound finding from yesterday's scan I need to address first. It's a significant detail tied to this pregnancy." Zhanglan cut him off harshly before he could continue, her voice sharp and impatient. "Doctor, skip the extra chatter. We don't care about trivial pregnancy details. Just read the DNA numbers. Tell us if this child belongs to my son or some outside man she's been sleeping with." Chunyu nodded aggressively beside her, echoing her grandmother's demand. "Right, get straight to the result. We don't have time to waste on irrelevant small talk about her body." Dr. Zhou's eyebrows lifted slightly at their rude interruption, but he didn't argue. He only flipped open the sealed DNA report, laid the full printed pages out across the table, so every single one of us could read the bold black text on the final conclusion line at the same time. Chundong's hand hovered over the paper, hesitant to pick it up. Zhanglan leaned forward over the table, squinting hard at the print, her lips curled into a sneer, fully convinced the numbers would validate all her slander against me. Chunyu was the first to blurt out a confused mumble as her eyes scanned the conclusion paragraph, the smug smirk sliding right off her face mid-sentence. "Wait, what does it say again?" "The probability number can't be right." Zhang snatched the report out of Qindong's hands, snatching her reading glasses from her purse and shoving them onto her nose, her fingers shaking as she traced the printed line with a trembling finger. Her voice cracked thin the second the words registered in her brain. 99.9999% probability of direct paternal match. No, that's impossible. There's a mistake in your lab testing. This document has to be falsified. Dr. Zhou shook his head firmly, leaning forward to tap the official lab watermark stamped on every page of the report. This facility is nationally certified for judicial paternity testing. All sample collection, centrifugal separation, and gene sequencing are recorded under 24-hour surveillance footage, with 2 separate senior lab technicians cross-verifying every dataset. There is zero room for human error or tampering here. He turned his full attention to Zhang Lan, tone steady and unyielding. The amniotic fluid extracted from Ms. Wen's abdomen perfectly aligns with Mr. Chen's blood sample. There is no scientific basis to dispute this match. Zhang Lan's face drained of all color in an instant, her hands going limp and letting the report flop onto the tabletop. She stared blankly at the paper for 10 full seconds before flying into a desperate new accusation, grasping at the last flimsy lies she could manufacture to save face. She must have secretly collected Dong's blood somehow without him knowing, stolen hair clippings, or discarded cups to rig the test samples ahead of time. All sample collection was witnessed by 3 center staff members yesterday morning. Dr. Zhou countered immediately, cutting off her wild conspiracy theory before she could elaborate further. Mr. Chun personally drew his blood in front of our nurses, and the amniocentesis procedure was supervised by myself and a licensed obstetrician. There was no opportunity for MS. When to alter any specimens at any stage of the testing process. Chun Dong sat frozen beside me, his entire body rigid, staring at the DNA report like it held a sledgehammer that had just crushed every lie his mother and daughter had fed him for months. All those nights he stood by silently while they tore me apart, all the times he doubted my honesty, every single one crashed down on him all at once. He raised a hand to cover his mouth, his throat bobbing like he was holding back tears he'd refused to shed until this moment. Chen Yu's head hung low, her phone slipping out of her grasp and clattering onto the tile floor. She couldn't summon a single rebuttal. Every cruel thing she'd said about me being a gold-digging adulterer was proven completely baseless by official medical evidence. The room fell dead silent, save for the quiet hum of the air conditioning unit mounted on the wall. DR. Zhou waited for their initial shock to settle before speaking again, pulling the supplementary B-scan ultrasound printout from the back of the file folder and sliding it to the center of the table for all 4 of us to see. As I tried to mention before your family interrupted me, this pregnancy carries an extremely rare clinical presentation we flagged during yesterday's obstetric imaging workup. He tapped 2 tiny, distinct gestational sacs visible on the black and white ultrasound screen, each with its own clear, steady fetal heartbeat marker labeled alongside the blurry infant outlines. MS. One is carrying monoamniotic identical twins. Both fetuses have strong, consistent heart rates and fully normal early developmental indicators at 6 weeks gestation. Twins. That single word hung heavy in the air, hitting Zhang Lan harder than the DNA match report had. For 8 years, she'd obsessed over securing a male heir for the Qin family business, spending 6 months tormenting me for being barren and worthless. And the woman she'd spent half a year abusing was carrying 2 Qin bloodline children at once. A medical miracle doctors had labeled less than a 1% chance of ever happening to my body. Zhang Lan stumbled backward in her chair, nearly tipping the whole piece of furniture over behind her, her voice rising into a shrill, disbelieving wail. How can that be? The hospital said she couldn't get pregnant at all. Just 1 child would have defied all medical odds. Now 2? Endometriosis stage 4 drastically reduces natural conception odds, but it does not eliminate them entirely, Dr. Zhou explained clinically, laying out the plain medical facts without any bias. Single instances of unprotected intercourse can still result in viable pregnancy in rare cases, and twin conception compounds that statistical improbability even further. This case is highly unusual from a gynecological standpoint. Chun Dong's chair scraped loud against the floor as he shot to his feet, his eyes locked on the ultrasound photo displaying his 2 unborn children. Tears welled up and spilled over his cheeks unfiltered, no longer hidden behind quiet hesitation. He turned to look at me, and the raw shame in his gaze was impossible to miss. He'd let his mother and stepdaughter threaten to force an abortion on these 2 innocent babies less than 24 hours prior, all based on groundless slander he'd partially believed. Chunyu stared at the twin scan, her lower lip trembling violently. All her dreams of being the sole inheritor of her father's logistics company and villa shattered on the spot. If the twins survived birth, the family assets would be split 3 ways at minimum, and her privileged lifestyle she'd taken for granted was no longer guaranteed. She couldn't even lift her head to meet anyone's eyes, consumed by embarrassment and bitter resentment tangled together. Zhang scrambled to rebuild her narrative yet again, grasping at another hollow excuse to shift blame away from herself. Even if the kids are his, she planned this whole scheme from the start. Pretended she couldn't conceive to lower our guard, waited for the perfect chance to trap Dong with twins so she could take half his fortune. I finally spoke up after listening to her endless stream of fabricated lies for over an hour, my tone flat and emotionless, no trace of anger, only exhausted clarity. I showed you my official infertility diagnosis 6 months before I ever conceived. I signed a written contract with your son stating I had 0 desire to bear children and asked only for a quiet, judgment-free living arrangement. The only night we were intimate happened after his birthday dinner when he was heavily intoxicated. I had no control over that single incident. There was no premeditated trap, only a 1 in a million medical miracle none of us could predict. I gestured at the DNA and ultrasound reports spread across the table between us. Every piece of paper here proves I told the truth from day one, while every accusation your mother and granddaughter hurled at me was a deliberate fabrication designed to humiliate and discard me. Chun Dong couldn't stand to listen to his mother's false accusations any longer. He stepped forward, cutting her off mid-rant with a sharp, unrecognizable tone he'd never used toward her before. That's enough, Mom. Every cruel thing you've said about Wenjing today and over the past 6 months is proven completely false. You spent months spying on her, digging up her old divorce records to shame her, forcing herbal tonics down her throat, encouraging you to bully her nonstop. And today you even threatened to force her to abort our twin babies without a shred of evidence to back up your lies. He turned to face Chinyu next, his voice heavy with disappointment. You rummaged through her locked private belongings without permission, stole her medical documents, paraded them around the house to stage a public witch hunt against her, all because you feared someone might share my inheritance with you. You've acted spoiled, cruel, and completely ungrateful for everything I provided you your entire life. Zhang Lan's mouth fell open. Stunned her son was finally standing firmly against her decades of manipulative control. She reached out to grab his arm, trying to tug him back to her side. Dong, I only did all this for our family's bloodline. Can't you see I was just protecting you from being taken advantage of? Protect me? Chun pulled his arm roughly out of her grip, stepping back to stand beside my chair, his shoulder positioned firmly in front of mine as a physical barrier separating me from her. You spent 6 months tormenting the woman I legally married, threatened to kill my 2 unborn children over a baseless guess, and created endless chaos inside our home, all for your outdated obsession with male heirs. That is not protection. That's unbridled cruelty. He dropped down onto one knee beside my chair, his voice soft and broken with unreserved remorse, his hands hovering carefully near my stomach without daring to touch me uninvited. Wenjing, I'm so sorry I failed you utterly. I let them abuse you day after day, doubted your word without a single piece of supporting evidence, and nearly lost our 2 children to our family's unreasonable malice. Whatever you need from me to make this right, I will do it without hesitation. Zhang sat frozen in her chair, utterly speechless for the first time since I'd stepped foot inside their villa half a year prior. All her patriarchal scheming, all her surveillance and slander, all her threats of forced termination had crumbled completely in front of irrefutable medical proof. Chunyu buried her face in her hands, silent sobs muffled behind her palms, fully aware there was no way to redeem her vicious behavior toward me. We left the genetic testing center without exchanging a single word with Zhang or Chinyu on the ride back to the villa. Chun Dong drove in complete silence, glancing at me in the passenger seat every 30 seconds like he was terrified I'd disappear out the car window. Once we pulled into the villa driveway, he turned to me with a desperate, shaky request. Let's head inside and talk this through properly. I'll fire all the old house staff, remodel the entire house however you want, send you back to school with limited access to the property, and move Mom to a separate residential complex nearby if that's what you need to feel safe. I didn't answer him immediately. I stared down at my abdomen, thinking of the twins growing inside me. All the pain this family had put me through over half a year. I'd come into this contractual marriage only wanting peace, yet I'd endured constant surveillance, verbal abuse, false adultery accusations, and threats against my unborn children. A single heartfelt apology wasn't enough to erase all the harm they'd caused. Before we even stepped through the front gate, my mind had already formed 2 unnegotiable, non-negotiable demands to lay out to Chendong that night, full household authority handed over to me, and formal public apologies from both Zhanglan and Chinyu in front of every household staff member. If he refused to meet these terms, I was fully prepared to pack my belongings that same evening, take the twins, and file for a clean divorce with zero interest in his wealth or villa. The balance of power inside the Chen household had flipped irreversibly that afternoon. Where once I was treated as a disposable, barren outsider, I now carried the 2 sole male/female heirs to his entire business empire, and all the leverage to rewrite every single household rule, or walk away forever if Chendong's atonement failed to satisfy me. The true reckoning inside the villa's living room was only hours away, and every member of his hostile family would be forced to bow to my conditions to keep their place in the family home. We left the genetic testing center without exchanging a single word with Zhang or Chinyu on the ride back to the villa. Chun Dong drove in complete silence, glancing at me in the passenger seat every 30 seconds like he was terrified I'd disappear out the car window. Once we pulled into the villa driveway, he turned to me with a desperate, shaky request. Let's head inside and talk this through properly. I'll fire all the old house staff, remodel the entire house however you want, send you back to school with limited access to the property, and move Mom to a separate residential complex nearby if that's what you need to feel safe. I didn't answer him immediately. I stared down at my abdomen, thinking of the twins growing inside me. All the pain this family had put me through over half a year. I'd come into this contractual marriage only wanting peace, yet I'd endured constant surveillance, verbal abuse, false adultery accusations, and threats against my unborn children. A single heartfelt apology wasn't enough to erase all the harm they'd caused. Before we even stepped through the front gate, my mind had already formed 2 unnegotiable, non-negotiable demands to lay out to Chendong that night, full household authority handed over to me, and formal public apologies from both Zhanglan and Chinyu in front of every household staff member. If he refused to meet these terms, I was fully prepared to pack my belongings that same evening, take the twins, and file for a clean divorce with zero interest in his wealth or villa. The balance of power inside the Chen household had flipped irreversibly that afternoon. Where once I was treated as a disposable, barren outsider, I now carried the 2 sole male/female heirs to his entire business empire, and all the leverage to rewrite every single household rule, or walk away forever if Chendong's atonement failed to satisfy me. The true reckoning inside the villa's living room was only hours away, and every member of his hostile family would be forced to bow to my conditions to keep their place in the family home. I pulled the 2 official medical documents out of my tote bag, setting them flat on the coffee table within everyone's line of sight before taking a seat across from Zhanglan and Chinyu. My tone stayed calm, no raised volume, every word deliberate and unalterable. First rule, This villa falls under my full household authority from today forward. All daily schedules, meal planning, staff hiring and dismissal, room renovations, household spending, and guest visitation are my sole decisions. No one overrules me. No one sneaks into my private bedroom or personal storage ever again. Zhang Lan's mouth dropped open, ready to protest the loss of her decades-long control over the household. Before she could get a single word out, Chen Dong spoke over her firmly. This condition is accepted. If you refuse to respect Wen Jing's authority, you may no longer live in this home. Zhang froze mid-protest. Her mouth clamped shut tight, swallowed her complaints down hard. She could not risk being separated from the twin great-grandchildren she'd obsessed over for years, so she had no choice but to surrender the power she'd clung to since moving into the villa. I moved on to the second mandatory term, locking eyes with both women one at a time to ensure they fully understood the stakes. Second, both of you deliver a formal, unscripted apology in front of Li Sa right now. You will address every harm you've caused me over the past 6 months, spying, rummaging my private belongings, false adultery accusations, threats to terminate my pregnancy, and all daily verbal slander. No half-hearted mumbles, no excuses buried in your apology lines. If I detect any insincerity, this conversation ends immediately, and I leave with the twins tonight. Chen Yu shot to her feet, rage bubbling over her forced composure. Why do we have to apologize to her in front of the maid? This is private family business. Your harassment was never private, I countered flatly. You stole my private medical documents and staged a public inquisition in my locked bedroom, screaming accusations loud enough for the whole house to hear. A witness is required to guarantee you never repeat this pattern of abuse once my twins are born. Chen Dong turned to his daughter, his disappointment plain on his face. You broke into her locked storage, stole confidential medical records, and spread baseless slander that nearly cost me my 2 kids. You owe her a genuine public apology, no exceptions. If you refuse, I will suspend all your tuition, housing allowance, and monthly spending money indefinitely. The threat of losing all financial support struck Chen Yu hard. She collapsed back onto the sofa, her eyes glistening with frustrated, angry tears she dared not let spill out fully. Zhang Lan also recognized there was no loophole to weasel out of this demand. Her son's loyalty had fully shifted to me and the unborn twins, leaving her without any leverage to bargain. Li Sa stood quietly beside the dining table, her cloth hanging limp in one hand, watching the standoff unfold without daring to interject. I leaned back against the sofa cushions, resting one protective hand lightly over my stomach, waiting for either woman to step forward and speak their remorse out loud. Zhang Lan stood first, her shoulders hunched, every movement stiff with unwillingness. She dragged her feet over to where I sat, keeping her gaze fixed on the floor tiles instead of meeting my eyes directly. Her apology came slow, halting, every word dragged out like it physically pained her to admit her wrongdoing. Wen Jing, I apologize for mistreating you these past 6 months. I wrongly judged you for being unable to conceive, spied on your whereabouts, pressured you to take fertility medicine you had no obligation to consume. I falsely accused you of infidelity yesterday and threatened your pregnancy. Without any proof, I acted out of stubborn obsession over a family heir and hurt you deeply. I won't interfere with household matters or your personal space from this day forward. She finished her speech in a rush, turning to step away the second the last syllable left her mouth, as if staying another second would break her fragile pride entirely. I nodded once, no warmth in my response. Your apology is heard, but remember every word you said here today. Any repeat of that behavior will result in you moving out of this residence permanently. Zhang Lan flinched slightly at my clear warning, then retreated to the far end of the sectional sofa, shrinking into the cushions like a punished child. Next, it was Chen Yu's turn. She hesitated for several long minutes, biting down hard on her lower lip to hold back angry retorts she knew she could not voice without losing all her father's funding. She shuffled over to my spot, her voice thin, tight with suppressed resentment. Wen Jing, I'm sorry I snooped through your private bedroom, stole your pregnancy tests, and spread lies that you were having an affair to trap Dad for money. I've been bitter and unkind to you ever since you moved into this house, and I shouldn't have said those cruel things about your pregnancy yesterday. I won't touch your personal belongings or speak harshly to you anymore. Her apology was shallow, lacking any genuine remorse, only fear of financial punishment driving every sentence. I acknowledged it without a single comforting word. Your apology is noted. If you ever again attempt to dig through my things or slander me in front of anyone, your father will cut all financial aid to you, and you will not be welcome in this villa again. Chen Yu's face burned bright red with humiliation, spinning on her heel and rushing up the staircase to lock herself in her bedroom the second she finished speaking. Li Sa let out a quiet, relieved breath, folding her cleaning cloth back over her arm and returning to finish wiping the table, the tense toxic atmosphere in the living room finally lifting slightly. Chen Dong sat down beside me, carefully placing his palm lightly over my hand resting on my stomach, his touch gentle and tentative. I've already made calls while we were driving back. Starting tomorrow, all the old household staff who stood by and watched you be bullied without speaking up will be replaced with new employees I've interviewed personally. The second floor master bedroom will undergo full renovations to whatever style you prefer, and all of Mom and Yu's old furniture that makes you uncomfortable will be removed from the main living areas. He pulled out his cell phone, scrolling through a list of property listings for small standalone townhouses on the edge of the city. I'm also looking at separate housing for Mom. She can live independently nearby with a full-time caregiver if she's unable to respect the household rules you've set, and we can visit her with the twins on weekends on your terms only. This was the third major plot reversal hidden in this chapter. Chen Dong was fully prepared to separate his mother from our daily lives to guarantee my peace, a choice he would never have considered 6 months prior when he prioritized avoiding family conflict over my safety. That night, I sat by the bedroom window watching the villa's garden lit by outdoor lamps, running a hand gently over my belly where the twin babies rested. Dong stayed beside me silent for hours, not pushing for conversation, only keeping me company while I processed everything that had unfolded over the past 2 days. I'd secured full authority over the household and forced public accountability for my two biggest tormentors, but I knew their resentment would not vanish overnight. Zhang still clung to her outdated obsession with family bloodlines, and Yu's jealousy over the twins inheriting a share of the fortune simmered just beneath her surface compliance. Two new unforeseen complications were already brewing, set to surface in the coming weeks. First, Zhang would attempt to secretly contact distant relatives to badmouth me, framing me as a power-hungry woman who'd manipulated her son with twin children to seize control of the villa and business. Those relatives would relay every toxic gossip back to Dong, triggering a new wave of household tension that I would need to resolve with ironclad boundaries. Second, Yu planned to drop out of her university courses temporarily to linger at the villa daily, deliberately lingering around me and the twins once they were born, hoping to stir minor conflicts and chip away at the household authority I'd established. Dong's atonement and compliance were genuine, but his mother and stepdaughter's grudges would not fade easily. I'd won the immediate power struggle inside this home, but the long-term fight to protect my twin children and maintain my peaceful life was far from over. I glanced over at the locked storage box holding the DNA and ultrasound reports, knowing those documents remained my unbreakable safety net for any future conflict. Whatever manipulative schemes Zhang and Yu cooked up next, I held irrefutable proof of their past cruelty and the legal right to remove them from our lives entirely if they crossed my lines again. The next 3 months passed in quiet, unbroken peace. Dong kept every single promise he'd made after the DNA test. The old housekeepers who'd stood by silently while I was bullied were all dismissed, replaced by 2 professionally trained maternity nannies who answered only to me. The master suite was fully renovated into a warm, soft-toned nursery and bedroom combined. All the dark, heavy furniture Zhang loved was hauled away, and I picked every piece of decor myself. He rented a 1-bedroom service department 10 minutes away from the villa for Zhang, hired a full-time live-in caregiver for her, and set strict visiting rules. She could only come over twice a week, and only if I gave explicit permission in advance. No unannounced drop-ins, no lingering overnight, no trying to rearrange the baby's supplies behind my back. Yu's unlimited monthly allowance was slashed by 70%, her luxury credit cards frozen. Dong told her bluntly that the extra funds would be reserved for the twins' education trust, and she'd only receive standard living money if she returned to finish her college courses on schedule. If she skipped more classes to hang around the villa causing trouble, her allowance would be cut entirely. For the first time since I'd stepped foot in this villa half a year prior, I didn't live under constant surveillance or verbal sniping. I spent my days reading parenting books, picking out tiny clothes for the twins, walking the coastal garden with Dong each evening. He never left my side for long, handled all business meetings remotely whenever possible, and booked the top private obstetric ward for my upcoming delivery. But the quiet truce was only surface level. Zhang never stopped plotting to regain influence. Every time she visited, she'd sneak old herbal tonics into the kitchen cabinets, mutter that my parenting choices were too soft for Chen's heirs, and call her sisters to rant about how I'd stolen her son and seized the household power. Yu's tactics were more petty. She'd linger by the nursery, touch the twins' new strollers and toys without asking, make snide comments about the expensive baby gear Dong bought, and try to plant seeds of doubt in her father's ear by claiming I was overspending the family fortune on trivial infant items. Each time they pulled these small stunts, Dong shut them down instantly, no room for argument. Still, I knew their resentment hadn't faded. They were only waiting for the twins to be born to launch their next, bigger power grab. My labor hit 3 weeks ahead of the predicted due date. Dong panicked so badly, he forgot his car keys twice before we rushed to the private hospital, never leaving the delivery room for a single hour over the 14-hour labor process. I endured every contraction with his hand gripped tight in mine, and when the first twins' cry echoed through the ward, all the past 6 months of pain, slander, and loneliness melted away for a moment. A boy first, then a girl 2 minutes later, perfect healthy twins just as the ultrasound had shown. The nurses wrapped them in soft blankets and laid them in my arms, and I cried silent, happy tears, the impossible miracle I'd once thought medical science ruled out finally resting against my chest. Dong knelt beside the hospital bed, kissing my knuckles repeatedly, his eyes red and swollen from crying. Thank you, Jing. Thank you for giving us our family. I'll spend the rest of my life making up for all the hurt I put you through. Word of the twins' birth spread fast. That afternoon, Zhang and Yu showed up at the hospital ward uninvited, ignoring the nurses' visiting hour restrictions. Zhang pushed past the ward door carrying a cloth bag full of homemade herbal brews, ready to feed the newborns bitter traditional tonics the second she got close to the cribs. Yu trailed behind, her face stiff with jealousy, pretending to coo at the babies while glancing around the private ward's luxury furnishings. Before Zhang could step anywhere near the bassinets, Dong stood between her and the beds, his tone cold and unyielding. Nurses have strict rules for newborns, no outside homemade medicine allowed. Leave those tonics at the door, or the hospital security will escort you out. Zhang's face crumpled with disappointment, but she tried to play the wounded elder, voice thin and shaky. I made these to strengthen the kids' bodies. They are Chen blood. Can't you let me care for them a little? Their mother decides what they eat and what treatments they receive, Dong answered flatly. You didn't respect her wishes for the past 6 months, so you don't get to override her choices now that they're here. If you can't follow the hospital's rules, you can leave immediately. Yu jumped in to try to soften the mood, leaning toward the baby girl's crib like she wanted to pick her up without asking my permission. Let me hold my little sister. Dad, I just want to see her close. I spoke up before Dong could cut her off, calm but firm. No touching without my consent. I just went through 14 hours of labor. I'm exhausted, and I don't have the energy to handle disruptions today. You two can visit for 20 minutes only, then you need to go. They lingered the allotted time, Zhang constantly trying to slip herbal packets beside the bassinets, Chinyu sneering at the designer baby blankets Qindong had ordered. The second the 20 minutes were up, Qindong personally walked them to the hospital lobby and told them not to return until I texted to say I was ready for visitors again. On the drive back to her rented apartment, Zhang made a long phone call to her entire sisterhood, spreading gossip that I'd turned her own son against her and was keeping the grandchildren locked away from their paternal grandmother. Her sisters all echoed her complaints, none knowing the full story of the 6 months of abuse she'd heaped on me. Chunyu posted vague, sad captions on her social media, hinting she'd been pushed out of her own family by an outsider with 2 planned children. A month after we brought the twins home to the villa, Zhang hatched her biggest plot. She gathered all her siblings, cousins, and distant relatives, arranged a large family dinner at a restaurant downtown, and sent Qindong a message claiming it was a simple get-together to celebrate the newborns. Hidden in her plan was a coordinated ambush. Every relative would take turns pressuring me to hand over childcare responsibilities to her, demand I split the family assets equally with Chinyu, and push Qindong to move her back into the villa permanently. Qindong saw straight through her scheme the second his aunt texted him privately, warning him Zhang planned to rally the whole family to gang up on me. He told me about the dinner's real motive that night, and we crafted a clear response. We would attend, bring all our medical records, the DNA report, and the 6 months of text logs proving Zhang and Yu's harassment, to lay every truth out in front of the entire extended clan once they tried to corner me. The restaurant private room was packed when we arrived. Zhang sat at the main table's head, putting on a sad, wronged elderly woman act the second we stepped through the door. Chinyu sat beside her, crossing her arms and staring daggers at me and the 2 nannies carrying the twin car seats. Dinner barely hit the table before Zhang's eldest sister opened the attack, reciting all the lines Zhang had coached her beforehand. Jing, you're young, don't know how to raise boys and girls properly. Like grandma moved back to the villa to help look after the twins, it's only right the paternal grandmother takes charge of the heirs. Another cousin jumped in, bringing up inheritance. Dong's business and villa will be worth millions down the line. Can't let only the 2 new babies inherit everything. Yu's his daughter too. You should set aside half the assets for her right now. Chanyu nodded vigorously, tears welling up for show. I don't want much, just a fair share. Dad's always loved me before she showed up. Zhang sighed loudly, wiping fake tears from her eyes. I just want to be close to my grandchildren. Jing's always shut me out, won't even let me feed them a spoon of soup. The room hummed with murmurs of agreement from relatives who'd only heard Zhang's one-sided gossip. No one knew the full truth of the past year's torment, until Qindong pulled the thick folder of documents from his bag and slid it onto the table center. Before anyone says another word pushing Jing around, read every page here, he said loud enough for the whole room to hear. He laid out the hospital infertility diagnosis, the DNA twin test report, screenshots of every threatening text from Zhang and Yu over 6 months, the record of her snooping and stolen pregnancy tests, the hospital's witness statement from the paternity exam day, and a written log of every time they'd harassed me, forced toxic tonics, and spread slander. One by one, the relatives picked up the papers and scanned through them. The murmurs died down completely as the evidence sank in. Zhang's face turned ash gray, all her performative sadness vanishing in an instant. Chinyu shrank back in her chair, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Qindong spoke slowly, his voice heavy with years of suppressed anger. My wife was diagnosed with less than 1% chance to conceive, yet she miraculously bore our twins. For 6 months before that baby existed, my mother and my daughter spied on her, verbally abused her, accused her of adultery, threatened forced abortion without a shred of proof. All of this is documented in writing and screenshots. I rented Mom a separate apartment because she refused to stop tormenting Jing, not because Jing drove her away. He turned to face all the relatives, no room for debate. The villa, the logistics company, all my personal assets are mine by legal right. I can allocate my wealth however I choose. I've set up equal trust funds for my son and daughter, and a moderate monthly allowance for you as long as she finishes university. I will not hand over half my fortune to her just because she spent a year bullying her stepmother and newborn siblings. He looked directly at Zhang, his tone final. You may visit the twins twice weekly with Jing's permission, but you will never move back into our villa. Any more coordinated attempts to gang up on her or spread lies to relatives, and all visiting privileges are revoked permanently. Aunt Zhang, who'd led the ambush earlier, set the papers down silently, ashamed to open her mouth again. Every relative who'd been coached to pressure me turned to glare at Zhang. They'd been used as pawns in her manipulative game, lied to for months on end about what had really happened inside the villa. No one finished their meals point one by one. The distant relatives made quiet excuses and left the private room, unwilling to take Zhang's side after seeing irrefutable proof of her cruelty. Chunyu bolted out of the restaurant first, too embarrassed to stay seated. Zhang sat alone at the empty table, staring at the stack of evidence that had destroyed every last bit of support she'd had from the extended family. We left the restaurant without glancing back at Zhang, driving home to our quiet villa where the twins napped soundly in their bright nursery. After that disastrous family dinner, Zhang lost all social standing among the Qin relatives. No one would take her calls or listen to her one-sided complaints anymore. She stopped arranging large get-togethers to gang up on us, only reaching out briefly once every few weeks to ask if she could come see the babies, strictly adhering to the twice-a-week visiting rule I'd set. She never again dared sneak herbal medicine or try to seize childcare control, fully stripped of all the manipulative leverage she'd once held. Chunyu's fate followed soon after. She skipped half her semester's classes to scheme against us, and the university put her on academic probation. Chundong cut her allowance to a bare minimum, telling her she'd receive no graduation gifts or housing support until she graduated with passing grades. She had to take a part-time retail shift to cover her own spending money, too busy plotting against us to maintain her grades, too ashamed to show her face at our villa unless absolutely necessary. She stopped posting bitter social media rants, realizing all her classmates and distant kin knew the full truth of her jealousy and cruelty toward me and the twins. 6 months after the twins were born, Qin transferred 40% of his logistics company's equity into a joint asset account under my name and his, plus full ownership of the villa's property deed signed over to me as a lifelong gift. The contract marriage we'd signed a year prior was replaced with a genuine, loving partnership. He no longer saw our arrangement as a business deal, only a real family built around me and our 2 children. We sold Zhang's old cluttered furniture, fully remodeled the villa's living spaces to match my taste, filled every room with the twins' toys and soft decor. Every morning, Qin handles business from a home office. I care for the babies with the nanny's help, and we take long sunset walks along the coastal garden as a family of 4. No more tense dinners, no secret surveillance, no endless accusations hanging over our heads. Occasionally, Zhang comes over for 2 hours to hold her grandchildren, her attitude subdued and quiet, never daring to overstep my rules again. She speaks to me only in polite, brief sentences, fully aware any misstep means she loses time with her only 2 great-grandchildren. Chun-Yu rarely visits, only stopping by once every couple of months to awkwardly see the twins for an hour before rushing off to her part-time job and classes. Neither of them can stir up any more chaos in our lives. All their power plays, manipulative gossip, and desperate inheritance schemes collapse completely at that family dinner, never to rise again. One quiet evening, I sat on the balcony watching Qin chase our twin boy and girl around the lawn, their high, happy laughter floating through the air. I traced the faint scar on my abdomen from the C-section, thinking back to the day I'd held that infertility report in the tea shop, convinced I'd never carry a child. I'd walked into a contractual marriage, seeking only quiet freedom from fertility judgment, endured 6 months of unprovoked abuse, survived a public paternity witch hunt, and walked away with 2 healthy babies, full household authority, shared ownership of the family fortune, and a husband who devoted every day to making amends for his past failures. I'd never sought vicious revenge against Zhang and Qin. All I'd ever wanted was to protect my miracle children and earn the basic dignity every spouse deserves. Now I had both, and far more. The old hostility, the endless fights, the threats and slander were all distant, faded memories, buried beneath the warm, steady happiness of our small, true family. Qin walked up the balcony steps with the twins tucked in his arms, sitting beside me and wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "None of this would be ours if I hadn't finally woken up and stood by you," he said softly, pressing a kiss to my temple. I leaned my head against his shoulder, watching the golden sunset spill over the garden. The years of loneliness and hurt were gone for good. From this day forward, every sunrise belonged only to me, my husband, and our 2 precious twins. No more toxic family drama, no more waiting for empty apologies, no more fighting to claim the life that was always mine. This miracle, this peace, this hard-won happiness was entirely mine to keep.